Well, how can you defeat doubt? How can you get freedom from being worried whether or not you know God? How can you know that you know God? That's the primary concern of John in this letter. How can we know God? How can we know that we know God? The big idea in this passage in specific is how can we reassure our hearts? There's going to be times when doubt comes, when you are just, because of your own sin, because of someone's sin against you, because God doesn't answer your prayer, because you misunderstood a Bible verse, because a Christian leader failed you, something happens that makes you go, I'm just not so sure about what's going on with me and God right now, whether or not I'm one of God's kids. I'm confused. Now, the good news is we have an 85-year-old man writing this book who is ecstatic about God and the church. John is an old man at this point. He began following Jesus when he was a teenager, but now he's old, and he's giving us encouragement about our relationship with Christ. And he can do that because he met Jesus personally. He saw him, he heard him, he touched him. And though our faith is objective, it is historical, it exists outside of us, it is also tremendously personal and subjective. And we see this in the first chapter. John is talking about his experience with Jesus and how it is objective but subjective. It is cognitive, yet it's emotional. Now, religion tends to go one way or another, doesn't it? It either goes to the head, where we know a lot about God because of our theology and because we memorize certain things, or it goes to the emotions and we just get really excited about God. But Christianity blends both. It both fills the head and captivates the emotions. And this is the faith that John wants us to understand, that Christianity is not simply left brain intuitive or right brain analytical, that it's both. And because it is both, it is historical and it's personal. But what we saw in chapter 1 as well is that Christianity is communal. All this language in chapter 1, if you want to go there with me, is we language. You know, he always uses the we, and it's not simply the editorial we. He's talking as a person who's a member of the church to the church. And we've said this 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, but you cannot serve God in isolation. You can try, but it will not work long term, because eventually what will happen is you will get discouraged or you will get totally arrogant because you have no one in your life that you're pouring into. You're simply kind of your own pastor, your own church member, right? And you kind of serve and exist for yourself. And I know a lot of people that say, well, I'm in a Bible study. Well, that's good, but that's not the New Testament. You must be in a local church. And I know some of us are double dippers, meaning we go to the Journey and then we go to another church, and you need to stop and repent of that sin. And you need, because here's what happens. People go to many churches and they serve in no church, okay? So it's one thing to get refreshed and encouraged by going to another church and being encouraged, but it's another thing to simply be a religious consumer that goes and consumes and takes from the goods of both churches and gives nothing back. That is foreign to the New Testament. That is sin in the New Testament. John is saying, don't do that. Be a part of the local church, because that's not only where the community is, that is where the joy is. Look in verse 4 of chapter 1 with me. 1 John 1:4. And we, there's the we, are writing these things so that our joy may be made complete. His whole premise as he writes this letter is that we experience joy, right? And it's funny how he gets us there. He says, I want you to have joy in verse 4. In verse 5, he says, this is how you have joy. God is light. God is light. Verse 5. Joy comes not when we start with ourselves, not when we think firstly about ourselves, but when we think primarily and mainly and firstly about God. That's what he's saying. That you start with God. When you start with yourself, you always end up in darkness and idolatry. But when you start with God, you start with purity. That's what this whole God is light means. He's pure. All his motivations are always right. At the center of everything that he does is purity and justice. But it's also that God is holy. God is light means God is holy. He's set apart. He's other than us. And John is saying we have to start with God. Now, what keeps us from seeing God as light, seeing God as pure, seeing God as holy? Chapter 1 says that it's our sin. And he uses this metaphor called darkness to describe our sin, that we are dark, and then when the God who is light comes, we cannot experience him because of our own sin and our own darkness. Then he gets into chapter 2 and says it's not just your overt sin or your denial of your sin, it's that you don't do what you know you should do. There are clear commands in Scripture that you are not keeping. You are not obeying God's commands. And not only that, chapter 2 and chapter 3 say, you're failing to love the people around you. And to the degree that you love people, to that degree do you love God. And so this is what keeps us from experiencing joy. This is what keeps us from experiencing God. Now, John is trying to do three things in this letter in way of review. He's trying to show us the beauty of the Christian faith. He's trying to show unbelievers that they, in fact, are not Christians. And he's trying, as we've said, to show Christians that the ground of their assurance is not their perfect behavior, but the person and work of Christ. That's what he's trying to do. Okay? So for 3.5 chapters, he's basically pointed us vertically. He has said, figure out what you believe. Get your head right. Right? Then, get your life right. What you believe should come out of your life. But now, and we saw this last week, and it continues today, he's trying to get to our heart. He's trying to get to our level of compassion, how we feel about people who need things from us. That's what he's pushing on. Look in verse 16 of chapter 3. Well, this is the verse we read last week, the precursor to the verses this week. Verse 16, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. So this is love, right? That you lay down your life, that you take the world's goods. Let me explain world's goods just for a moment, because we really didn't do that last week. Certainly the world's goods are money, certainly. And so there are times and there are places, and you should especially be thinking about that in relation to affordable Christmas. You should especially be thinking about that in relation to the poor, the disenfranchised, and the marginalized in our city during this time of year. Not just during this time of year, but especially during this time of year. You should be thinking, what can I do with my money to help someone who is less fortunate than I? What can I do? There's always someone that has less. What can I do? That's a great question. How can I take the world's goods, i.e. money here, and help someone in need? But it's money, but it's not just money. It's also time. Time is a world good, right? So how can I use my time to help someone in need? How can I not close my heart to the fact that I have time to give someone? What does that look like for me? Your talent is also a world good. You have talent on this earth. You can do things. How can I use my talent for someone who is less fortunate than me? How can I use what I have to help other people? How can I do that, right? Now, you also have power. You also have influence. Now, we see this demonstrated in the Son of God himself. The most powerful one became weak for other people is our example. What can I do? How can I use my power, culturally speaking, socially speaking? How can I use my influence to help someone who doesn't have as much power and have as much influence as me? And what John is saying, when we take what we have, our world goods, and we lay down our life, meaning we don't use our time, our talent, our money, our influence, our power, solely for our own needs or our own agenda. When we take those things and we give them to others, that is love. And that is what proves you're a Christian. Look in verse 19. By this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before him. Now this is a strange verse. Does anybody think this is a strange verse besides me? This is a strange verse. No one cares. No one raised their hand. In video land, I hope you raised your hand on that one. This is a strange verse. Honestly, for years, I didn't understand this verse. I know I've said this like 5 times this year. This is really true. This week, as I was studying, I think I have understanding of this verse. I had always divorced verse 19 from verses 16 through 18. I don't know why. I just had. And that's most of the time when you don't understand the Bible, what you've done. You're trying to deal with isolated verses apart from context. You can never really understand the Bible apart from context. It all goes together, right? So if you take verses 16 through 18, verse 19 starts making sense, because what he says in verse 19 is, by this we know that we are of the truth and shall reassure our heart from. What is this? What is by this? What's he talking about? He's talking about verses 16 through 18. Okay? What he's talking about is demonstrable, specific examples of you, yes, you, laying down your life, taking your world goods for other people. That's how you know you're a Christian, he says. Loving people horizontally confirms that you have a vertical connection with God. Good, loving acts for people demonstrates that you have received God's good and loving act for yourself. That's what he's saying. So John is saying, you know you're a Christian because you lay down your life for other people. Now here's where it gets tricky though, because this text also shows us why this is problematic. The ground of our assurance is the person and work of Christ. But secondarily, we can look at our life and go, I know I'm a Christian because of what Jesus has done for me, but that shows up in my life and how I love people. Now, here's the problem when you start trying to measure that. Have you ever tried to measure that? You get in trouble, which is why verse 20 and 21 are there. Keep reading with me. Or let's keep reading 19. But by this we know, we shall know that we are of the truth and shall reassure our hearts before him. Verse 20, for whenever our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. I love in verse 20, it says, whenever our hearts, in other words, this is going to happen. This is going to happen, this heart condemnation. Now, I'll describe this a little bit more specifically in a second, but condemnation comes from two sources. Okay? Satan, who is the accuser, the scripture says, of God's kids. He lies, he deceives, he tells you you're a loser. That's condemnation. But it also, the text says, comes from our hearts. It comes from within us. So Satan talks to us, and specifically those of us who have an overly sensitive conscience. Any of you like that? Before I was a Christian, I honestly believe there's a passage in 1 Timothy 4 that talks about this idea that you can literally sear your conscience. That you can literally, because of your own sin, your own rebellion, you can mess up the mechanism that's put in you by God, because you're made in the image of God. It's part of what it means to be made in the image of God, that you have this thing in you that goes, that's right and that's wrong. You can mess that up. I messed that up. I messed that up bad. To the point that as a teenager, I really did not have a sense of right and wrong. Because of my sin, because of my rebellion, I didn't know. I wasn't sure. I didn't feel bad when I did wrong things, even though my mom had told me that. I'd lost it, right? Okay, so then I become a Christian. Fast forward. And I did that pendulum swing from seared conscience to overly sensitive conscience. And I went to a Christian school about 2 years after my conversion, a Christian college, which is an interesting place to start with. They asked the question, this is how you know you have an overly sensitive conscience. You get the homework assignment that says, read a book and then write a paper. And then the professor said, the first line of your paper is, I have read all of the book. You ever had one of these? Now, if you have an overly sensitive conscience, this is like the worst thing ever. Because I had read all the book. But had I really read all the book? Did I look at all the footnotes? Did I skip a sentence? See, this is what I'm thinking. I'm paranoid, so much so that I go to the professor. And I say, Dr. Frost, I read all the book, I think. But I may have missed something. And I wrote the paper, and you said 3 pages. Look, it's exactly 3 pages, right? And he said, he was the first one to talk to me about this idea of an overly sensitive conscience. And I was like, oh. And I begin to work through that, right? This text addresses that in a very interesting way. Because what happens is, to your heart, it starts talking to you. It says things like this, specifically with love. That's the context. Are you sure you were really as loving as you should have been? Did you really do all that you could have done? Would you do better if you could have been in that situation again? In other words, this is what your heart is saying on a regular basis. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. All the time. When it comes to measuring, evaluating, analyzing, were you loving enough? Your heart, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Well, I could have done more. I should have done better. What if I would have done this? Now, there's three internal dynamics happening inside of you if you're a follower of Christ. First, there's guilt. Guilt mainly comes from people and their expectations upon your life. Right? Your family's good at this. Hopefully your spouse is not good at this. Hopefully your kids are not. But it's people's expectations on you. And it works kind of from the outside in. But then there is conviction, which we'll talk about in a second. That's from God. Okay? And that's from the inside out because the Holy Spirit lives in you. And condemnation is the counterfeit. And that, as I said, is from Satan and you. Conviction is very specific. We talked about this last week or the week before. I can't remember. Conviction is very specific. It's inviting. And it's future-oriented. This is what I mean. God says, this is wrong. Come to me. Let's go forward. That's conviction. That's how you know God is convicting you of a sin. Very specific, very inviting, very much let's get on with things. Okay? Condemnation, on the other hand, is very general. It's very, instead of inviting, it's kind of dismissing. And it's very past-oriented. Meaning, condemnation comes and says, you're wrong. Stay in your shame, and while we're waiting, let's worry about the past. Okay? A lot of people can convolute those two. They think God's talking to them when really it's their own heart influenced by Satan. God convicts of sin, but many of us in this room are condemned because of condemnation. We're condemned actually because of mistakes. Now stay with me. This is going to sound contrary to almost everything I always teach. How's that for hype? Some of us need to develop a robust theology of sin. It's not in our categories. This is why John hammered us in chapter 1. You need to call sin, sin, right? There are things in the Scripture that are clearly revealed. Some of us don't read the Bible because we don't want to know, right? So ignorance, right, is bliss. You're still accountable. You need to develop a theology of sin. Some of what you're calling is your behavior, your character, your character flaw, your personality, weakness. Some of you just say, well, this is how I am. No. You need to take that back to the Scripture, and you need to develop a robust theology of sin. Some of you, though, with an overly sensitive conscience, need to develop a robust theology of mistake. I made a mistake. And that's where this little phrase in our text, God is greater than our heart. He knows everything. This is where this comes in. I'll give you an example. Back in the day, when the church was first year of the church, which I do not ever want to do again. It's like the first year of marriage, right? Most time that's hard, right? You're getting to know each other. So the first year of the church was brutal. And so we had all these people, and we're going to love them. We're starting a church, so you got to love all comers. Whoever's there, you love. So we're trying to love people, and I get this guy who is hard to love, to put it nicely. He has got serious drug abuse issues, serious alcoholism, serious family dysfunction, but he's there, and I'm the pastor. So I got to love this guy. And I love him. I love him the best I can. I loaned him money. I should have known I wasn't loaning him money. You know how that is? Oh, it's just a loan. No, it's not. If you ever give anybody money, and don't ever say it's a loan, just give it to them. Just know you're just going to give it to them. And then you won't be disappointed and bitter and angry. Like I still am about this guy and my money. But I loaned him money. I spent time with him. I spent time with his wife. I spent time with his kids who hated him and his wife. Hated him for being such a jerk. Hated his wife for staying with him and not confronting him. But I just loved him the best I could. There was a church planter as well. Church planters are interesting folks. And this guy was really, I love him, but he was dumb in the sense that he just had a bad strategy. He was in the wrong context, but he made up for it by having a passionless marriage. So it was bad news, okay? Strike 3, bad news. I want to help the guy, though. I want to help him because I love church planters and I believe in them. So I'm trying to help him. And I am very gracious. I mean, so gracious with money, with time. Brought my wife into it, and we're spending time with him, and it's not going well. Now, here's the question I have about that. I don't know if you ever do this. I have these questions. Should I have been that gracious? Should I have been more firm with those two individuals? You want to know my answer? I don't know. God knows. God knows. I'm very compassionate but profoundly direct with men, okay? You think it's bad from the pulpit. It's really even more so directly. I love guys, and most guys need straight talk. A couple guys in particular got the straightest talk that I've ever given, personally. One guy came into our church, single guy, rich family, never had to work real hard, pretty lazy. That really drives me crazy when people are like that, very lazy. This guy's pushing all my buttons. He calls himself a Christian, but he's sleeping with his girlfriend. And he wants counsel because he wants to know the Bible better. He knows enough of the Bible that he's not obeying. Why am I going to teach him more that he's going to also not obey? That's my philosophy. So we're going to push on this girlfriend thing. We're going to talk about his work ethic. We're going to talk about his writing on being a trust fund baby issue. So I was very direct. And every meeting, I would just boom, 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 and just pound this guy, not physically, though I wanted to, verbally. Right? There's another guy in our church, single guy. And I met this guy, and this is the strangest guy I've ever met. All he wanted to do was climb rocks. He was a rock climber. So he literally worked so he could go to the weekend. He'd drive down to Arkansas. He'd drive down to Southern Illinois. He was always at the rock gym. He had a better relationship with rocks than people, right? Seriously. He couldn't hardly talk to another human being, specifically a woman, right? Which is what he wanted me to counsel him about. And I met with him 2 or 3 times, and I was just so frustrated. Now, let me ask you a question. Should I have been more gracious? Should I have been less harsh? I don't know. God knows. God knows. See, sometimes you verbally kick someone in the butt when you should have listened. Sometimes you listen when you should have kicked them in the butt. Sometimes you loan them money when you should have said no, and sometimes you say no when you should have loaned them money. God knows your heart. John is saying this: you have to appeal to God with regard to your motives, not just listen to your heart. Your heart is the seat of who you are biblically. It's not just your emotions, it's your mind and your will as well. It's where everything comes from, which is why Proverbs 4:23 says we are to guard our hearts because from it come the issues or the wellspring of life. And you can't just ignore your heart, right? You have to talk to your heart because your heart will confuse you. I get all caught up, especially those of you who are more priestly, meaning you really love people, you have approval issues, it bothers you when people don't love. You will stay up at night. You will avoid people that you think you didn't love well. You will radically alter your schedule because you're all conflicted about the past and how you dealt with them. What do you do with that? Most of you just listen to your heart and you just assume that that's God and you did something wrong. And maybe you did or maybe you didn't, but you're confused. There's no clarity. You don't know what to do. What do? You stop listening to your heart and you start talking to it. I'll give you a verse. Psalm 42. Psalm 42, verse 5. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Another word for heart in the Old Testament. And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall praise him my salvation. Who's he talking to? He's talking to his soul. He's talking to his heart. His heart is in despair, his heart is in turmoil, and his heart is talking to him. And David says, I'm not going to let my heart talk to me, I'm going to talk to my heart. Hope in God, for I shall again praise him. Martin Lloyd-Jones, commenting on this verse, a great British preacher from back in the day, listen to what he says. He says, have you realized that most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? Take those thoughts that come to you in the moment you wake up in the morning. You've not originated them, but they are there talking to you. They bring back the problems of yesterday, etc. Someone's talking. Who's talking to you? Your heart's talking to you. Now, this man's treatment, David's in Psalm 42, was this. Instead of allowing this self to talk to him, he starts talking to himself. Why are you cast down, O my soul, he asks. His soul has been depressing him, crushing him, putting him in despair. So he stands up and says, self, listen for a moment. I will speak to you. Now take my examples. I may have made a mistake with those guys that I mentioned. I'm sure I did. My heart is saying coulda, woulda, shoulda. But here's what I know about those 4 instances, and I'm not saying about everybody, but I know for those guys, I took time, I did listen to them, and I gave costly counsel to them. What do you mean, you charged them? No, I didn't charge them. And I don't charge people for counsel. It's my job. I'm a pastor, right? But costly counsel is when not only are you willing to give advice, you're willing to give your life, and I did that. I offered myself to those guys. So though I may not have crossed every T and dotted every I, I did it out of love. Now, some of you, this is going to transform your life because your whole deal is you're always asking yourself questions. Did I do it right? Did I say enough? Did I not say enough? You're paralyzed, especially this time of year, because you get around your family. And so you've got this internal heart going, you don't love them, you didn't return their email, they don't have email, you didn't write them a letter. All these things are going on in your heart, plus accompanied by the guilt that they're going to put on you. And you're a wreck, and you wonder why you hate Thanksgiving and Christmas. Right? Talk to your heart. Why? Because your heart is talking to you. And what John is saying is, you know you're a Christian because you lay down your life in love. You love people. You love people. Some of you just need to know you really do love. And it's clouded and it's shrouded in all this condemnation and all this despair that because you just are giving into guilt and you're giving into shame and you're giving into condemnation. And you don't have to do that. Now, where there's sin, repent. If I was sinful with any of those men, I need to go back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I should have listened more than talk. But sometimes we just make mistakes in the sense that we did the best we could, and we don't know. There's this uncertainty there. Let's not call everything so black and white and say, well, that was definitely a sin. Sometimes you don't know, okay? So you have a theology of sin, and you have a theology at times when you're trying to love people of mistakes. So that's assurance number 1. You know you're a Christian because you love people. Assurance number 2 is you know you're a Christian because God answers your prayers. Uh-oh. Verse 22, whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do what is pleasing in his sight or what pleases him. Let me read you all the verses that go along with this in the New Testament. Not all of them, but many of them. Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. John 14, whatever you ask in my name, Jesus says, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I'll do it, Jesus said. If you abide in me, Jesus said, my words abide in you. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now, you've asked nothing in my name. Ask, and you will receive, that your joy may be full. And then in 1 John 5, a passage we'll get to where we will really drill down on this. And this is the confidence we have towards him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the request that we have asked of him. Whew. There's a lot more I could have read. This text and others say this: God will answer your prayer. But many of the times in the Bible, when you see this promised answer, it's tied to an obedient life. So the more, it seems, Scripture says, the more faithful you are, the more God answers your prayer. Now, let me monkey with you a little bit on that one. Here's where it's paradoxical and a little tricky. The myth is God blesses me and answers me because of my good life. Wait a minute, you just said, the more faithful I am, the Scripture seems to say, the more faithful I am, the more God answers my prayer. But then you said, it is not my good life that brings God's blessings. Well, both can't be true. Actually, they can. They can. See, when you're obedient, you don't pray for dumb things. God doesn't answer foolish prayers. He just doesn't. I remember a long time ago, a guy was struggling in his marriage, which means he was married. Took a while. If you're married, you're struggling. Right? He was struggling, and he said, hey, Pastor, pray for me. I'm really struggling in my marriage. And I said, join the club. And then he said, I said, what are you praying about? Well, I'm just praying that, I'm like, specifically, give me your prayers, dude. What are you praying about? I'm praying about how I can divorce my wife. I really want to do it at the right time. Her birthday's here, Valentine's Day's here, Christmas is here. I don't, want to stay away from those days. We met this date, and I really want to, I really want to do it in a God-honoring way. And I'm like, is there grounds for divorce biblically? No. But God, I'm really praying about it, and God's going to show me. God is. I told him, God is not going to tell you something in prayer that He's already spoken to you in His Word. He's not going to contradict what He's already said. You don't have grounds for divorce. God's not going to answer that foolish prayer. They're bouncing off the ceiling, bro. It's not going to happen. I remember one girl came to me and said, she was literally in tears. I want my boyfriend to become a Christian. That was her plea. I said, what are you praying? I like to ask people when they're praying just to see if they're really doing it sometimes and to see how, a lot of times what we're praying reveals a lot. She said, I'm just praying that God will use me in His life. Right? I said, well, tell me about your relationship. Well, I'm bringing him to church sometimes. Doesn't really like to go, but I'm bringing him. And I've always asked this. If you're ever single and you're dating, and you meet with me, you're going to get this question. Just be ready for it. Are you having sex? I'm just going to ask it every time. Just know that. I just staved off a ton of counseling with that statement. Are you having sex? Yeah, but I'm really praying about it. And I'm praying that God will use me. And my thought was, someone's getting used here. And it's not by God. Your boyfriend's using you for sex and going to church with you to placate you so you'll keep having sex with him. Stop praying for God to use you and stop having sex. And then maybe your prayers will be effective. Foolish prayers. I remember one guy was like, man, I'm praying that really stressed about his grades, praying that I ace this test tomorrow. We're meeting. I want to ace this test tomorrow. I'm like, okay, great. I'll join you in that prayer. How have you been studying? Not really. Now, we've all been there, but this was the practice of this guy over and over. God's not going to answer that. See, when you're obedient, here's what happens. Here's why your prayers are answered more. You pray about wise things. It's not that God's going, oh, look how obedient and wonderful, so I'm going to bless that. That's not the gospel. What really the deal is, yes, God is a rewarder of those who seek Him, but we cannot tie answers directly to our great life. And if you think you can, you know what Jesus calls you? A Pharisee. Okay? You don't make a one-to-one there. Because what happens is, and this is prominent, and I'm going to get into this next week, and I can't wait on Christian television. Get into chapter 4, verse 1 through 6 about testing the spirits. The promise is, the more faithful you are, the more God blesses you. That is heresy. Was Jesus faithful? On a cross is where it ended for him. In death. Were the apostles faithful? All of them died a martyr's death directly, except for our boy John, who got to go to an island and die. You got to be careful with this stuff. The reason why I think the scripture says the righteous, those who know Christ, their prayers are answered mainly and plainly is because they pray for the right things. They don't pray foolish prayers. Secondly, when you pray, God literally changes your desire. Prayer is more a dialogue than a monologue, meaning you speak to God and then he adjusts your prayers. It's not like you're just wonderfully wise all the time in your prayers as a Christian. You just suddenly are wise and you know what to pray for. No, as you pray, as you interact with God, God changes your heart. I love this verse. I totally misunderstood it, as many people do. Psalm 37:4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, I read that as a new Christian, hopped up on Christian television. I thought, yes, I'm going to do some God stuff, and then God will give me what I want. That's exactly how I took it, right? But here's what this verse means. As you delight yourself in the Lord, his desires become your desires. And God always gets what God wants. God always gets his desires. So as his desires become your desires, you begin to pray those desires. You begin to pray his will, not your will. So what happens to your prayer life? You start getting your prayers answered. See how it works? This, John says, is evidence that you're a Christian because your prayers are answered. Now, lastly, verse 24. Now, this is an interesting verse, and we'll tease this out a little more. I'll just touch it right now, but John says in verse 24, whoever keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in them. And by this we know that he abides in us by the Spirit whom he has given us. Now, there are many ways to look at this verse, but one of the ways is you know you're a Christian because you're empowered to obey, because the Spirit lives in you. You literally have an internal power source, an interior strength that helps you live the Christian life. That's not based on your willpower. That's not based on just you looking at the Bible and going, yeah, I should really comply with that externally. I should really do that. No, there's a heart change. You're literally changed from the inside out. Your heart changes. But not only that, not only is it an empowerment to obey, it's an affirmation that you're God's. The Spirit literally is in you, not just to say, hey, do this, but the Spirit is in you saying, hey, look at whose you are. Look at whose you are. Now, I want to take us, as we close here, to Romans chapter 8. If you go left in your Bible, Romans chapter 8, because there's a couple places we could have gone, but page 944, Romans 8, and you see this very clearly. God gives us his Spirit as an assurance that we're his, and we know we have his Spirit when we are able to obey, and we're empowered to obey, but we know we have his Spirit because of what Romans tells us. Romans 8:14, page 944, for we all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Verse 15, for you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the Spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. And the Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we also may be glorified with him. What the Spirit does is it cries out, Daddy, Daddy God. God isn't just an abstract thought. God isn't just a boss. God isn't just sovereign. God is your Father. If you are a Christian, there's a Spirit cry within you that testifies to that. You're a son. You're a daughter. You're adopted. Nobody wanted you but him. And he took you and loved you And there's something on the inside that just changes everything. Talked to a girl literally today in pastoral counseling, street kid. She stole a Bible from a Christian bookstore, which kind of makes me laugh inside. She had no idea. Raised in a secular Jewish home, but Jesus just identified with her. And she left home. She starts reading her Bible. And she said, I'm this God's daughter. What happened? The Spirit, and she became a Christian. And she knew that she knew. She was, and see, what that does to you then, if you really have the Spirit, you cannot be content being a legalist. You cannot be content just going, well, they're the rules, and I'll keep them, and then God will like me. That just bothers you when you get into that, which you will get into that as a Christian. It's just part of the deal. You can't just go and just live however you want. The Spirit just goes, that's not who you are. That's not your master. God's your master. That's not your lover. God's your lover. God's your Father. There's an affirmation that you're a child of God. And the Spirit bears witness of that. And it's an invitation to intimacy, meaning it's not simply just, oh, great, I'm God's kid. Super. No, there's a longing to be with God. There's a desire to be alone with. If you're a Christian, there ought to be a thing in you going, I need to be alone with God. You may not know what it looks like. You may be a little freaked out by it, but there is something in you going, I've got to get with God. I've got to figure it out. I can't wait till work's done. I can't wait till I get to my lunch break. I can't wait till I get in my car. I can't wait till I get out of this church service. I've got to be with God. John says, that is how you know you're a Christian. That's the Spirit. You have to have the voice of God saying from the inside out, you're mine, and then you and your heart going, and I'm yours, Abba. That's the way it works. And that voice, if that's coming through, will drown out your heart condemnation. That thing that says you didn't love enough, you didn't do enough, you woulda, coulda, shoulda. God says, you're mine, I love you. If you're in sin, I will convict you. Don't look in the past, let's look in the present and repent and look to the future. That's how you live the Christian life. That's how you have assurance. Right? We shall know the truth, and we shall reassure our hearts with the truth. God is greater than our hearts. He knows all things. Our appeal for our gray areas go to God, not to how our family grew up with their values imposed on us. Back to God's Word. We know what He says. If we're not sure about it, we trust God with our hearts. We look at our motives. We let Him discern our motives. When our heart starts getting crazy and talking to us, we talk to it. Right? And that's how you stay assured from this passage. Let me leave you some questions. Question 1, and we'll leave these up during communion. Do I really take what I have and use it for others in need? Your world goods, your time, your talent, your money, your power, your influence. Do I really look to help people, or is this just about me? Question 2, do I really experience God answering my prayers? I mean, you do over and over again. I mean, there's dry spells and there's mystery. I live in that world, okay? But you see God at work in your life. You pray and things happen. And then lastly, do I really sense God's Spirit at work in me, empowering me, affirming me, inviting me to intimacy? See, those are the questions for us to consider. Once again, John's purpose, to show us the beauty of the Christian faith, to help unbelievers see that they're not yet true believers, and to help believers have assurance. So it all speaks to where we are. Let's ask God to speak to us, and let's consider these questions together. Let's pray. Lord, I ask that you would show us specifically where we need to repent, where we need to talk to our hearts, and where we need to listen to you. And we trust you to speak to us, Holy Spirit, and to show us that we need Jesus, or show us that we have Jesus, we are just not accessing him. And so, Lord, we just trust you to do that in this time.